Why are the ahadith important? Well, it is the avenue. It is the road which leads to success in this world and in the hereafter. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Inni qad taraktu fikum ma in i'tasamtum bihi falan tadillu abada. Kitab Allah wa sunnatu nabiyyih." That the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam explained that I am leaving two things with you. Hold on to them and you will never be misguided. What are they? The book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the sunnah of our Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. This is just setting the scene. So you can now understand so far what a hadith is. It is the sayings, actions, attributes, and silent approvals of our Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, why it is important. From that position, the early scholars and the early Muslims, they put all their effort in to try to find the sayings of our Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and safeguard them and preserve them for you and I. What they would do then is gather what they could and hear it from people and then try to record that so that people, you and I, could benefit from the sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. The actual gathering of it, the presentation of it, the science behind it, became known as a discipline called ilmul hadith, the knowledge of hadith, also called usulul hadith, the principles of hadith. And this is exactly what we are going to try to be focusing on today in this program. Of the ahadith that come to us, admittedly, some are very, very strong in terms of their authenticity, some are much weaker. In this program, we are going to refer to the highest stage of accreditation, which is a Sahih Hadith. What constitutes an actual Sahih Hadith? Like I said earlier, what I'm going to do is work backwards. I'm going to give you a Hadith Sharif, and I'm going to inform you that it has reached the stage of Sahih, and then tell you how and why it has reached that high and lofty status. The example that I am going to share with you is the most beautiful saying of our Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, in which he identifies love for him as the very essence of your faith. لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون أحب إليه من والده وولده والناس أجمعين. That none of you is a true believer until I, the messenger, become more beloved to him than his father, than his children, than all of humanity in its entirety. This is a Sahih Hadith. What we are going to do is show how. Where it is, firstly, to begin with, let us talk about where it has been mentioned. When you go to an Islamic library, then you will find this hadith in the works of Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sunan al-Nasa'i, Sunan ibn Majah, Musnad Ahmad, and Sunan al-Darmi. For the sake of our program, we're going to be looking at the particular report of Sahih al-Bukhari. We're going to look at his version of this hadith, which I think is hadith number 13 or 14 in Kitab al-Iman at the beginning part of Sahih al-Bukhari. What factors do we find in the narration of this to give it that rank of a Sahih Hadith? The first problem, perhaps the biggest problem, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam certainly said these words. Imam Bukhari, he is the one who is actually recording this, and he has jotted this down in his book Sahih al-Bukhari. The first and perhaps the most problematic situation we have is when Imam Bukhari lived. Imam Bukhari passed away in 256 after Hijrah, almost 250 years after the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. When Imam Bukhari wrote this hadith in his works, how could he be so sure that certainly the Prophet said this such a long time ago? It's like me, you asking, if I was to ask you now, please can you verify for me that you heard something from your relatives of someone down the line back in the mid-1800s. Most of us can't remember what someone said yesterday. So how are we going to span the gap of 250 years? This is the first problem the scholars had. How can we be so sure that the Prophet said these words when we are living 200, 300 years after him? So this is the first situation that we have. Imam Bukhari lived 2 centuries after the Prophet. How could he be so sure that the Prophet ﷺ said these words? The answer lies in a dynamic, pioneering, and original mechanism of Islam, which became known as the sanad, also called the isnad. The sanad, literally what does sanad mean? Something dependable. Something which you can depend on. What is a sanad? Basically, this was the chain of transmission consisting of men who passed on the hadith from generation to generation. So it was almost like Imam Bukhari, when he wrote this down in this first hadith, when he wrote it down in his works, he asked himself, where have I heard this from? I heard it from my teacher. Who did my teacher hear it from? He heard it from such and such person. Who did he hear it from? Such and such person. So there would be 3 or 4 people going up, spanning the distance of that large 250 years, until you get to the time of the companions, Ridwanullahi alayhim ajma'in. In this particular example, Sayyidina Anas. And then Sayyidina Anas, he certainly directly heard these words from the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. So this is what we call, the chain of transmission is what we call the sanad. The actual words of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, we call the matan. In this case, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون أحب إليه من والده وولده والناس أجمعين. This is the chain for this particular hadith then. At the bottom here we have Imam Bukhari. Imam Bukhari, when he recorded this hadith sharif, he also informed us that he heard it from his shaykh and his teacher, Yaqub bin Ibrahim. Yaqub bin Ibrahim, when he told Imam Bukhari this hadith, he also informed him that he heard it from Ismail bin Ibrahim. Ismail then, now you can appreciate that as we go upwards, we are coming closer and closer to the time of our Prophet. Abdul Aziz bin Suhaib, he verified that he heard it from the companion of Sayyidina Anas bin Malik radiyallahu ta'ala. And then Sayyidina Anas heard it from the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. For this particular presentation, I'm going to take you through this part of the chain. This part, as you can see, Sayyidina Anas did not only narrate to him, but he also narrated to Qatada. I'm going to ignore that for now. So we're going to concentrate on this part here. So this is what we call the sanad for the hadith, the chain of transmission. So now then, we can see that we have to begin to deal with the problems that we have spanning the distance. In all honesty, when Imam Bukhari was told by his teacher that I heard it from Ismail, who heard it from Abdul Aziz, who heard it from Anas, he could have accepted that and said, that's fair enough. He's my teacher, he's not likely to lie. I'm not going to question him. But because we are talking about a subject area which is pivotal, instrumental to the faith of all Muslims, Imam Bukhari went through his own checks as well. It was not sufficient for him to accept, yes, my ustad told me he heard it from Ismail, who heard it from Abdul Aziz. He went through those extra checks as well. What were these actual checks then? Well, now then, what Imam Bukhari wanted to know is theoretically, when my ustad Yaqub said he heard from Ismail, Imam Bukhari was asking now, I want proof that they could have actually practically met one another. Did they live in the same generation? Did they visit the same areas? Could they have sat in the same room and taken the hadith from one another? In order to actually find that information out now, it would require finding out biographical information about Ismail bin Ibrahim, for example. When did he die? When was he born? Where did he travel to? Who were his teachers? And so forth. So once we have the names, we need to check whether they could have actually heard from one another. This is called ittisal. And it forms the first condition of a Sahih hadith. They must have all overlapped with one another in terms of period. So in order for the hadith to be Sahih, Abdul Aziz must have lived in the time of Anas, Ismail bin Ibrahim must have lived in the time of Abdul Aziz, and so forth. It must have been feasible for them to have heard from one another. We'll put that into a diagram so it's easier to understand now. At the bottom here, 50 Hijrah going up to 200 Hijrah. At the top here we have the companion Sayyidina Anas bin Malik radiyallahu ta'ala anhum. Right down here we have Imam Bukhari. When Imam Bukhari heard this hadith from Yaqub bin Ibrahim, Yaqub claimed he heard it from Ismail bin Ibrahim. Is it possible that they could have lived in the same period? It is now. Why? Because it's overlapping in that area there. That is what we call ittisal. When Ismail bin Ibrahim, who lived between 110 and 193, when he claims to have heard from Abdul Aziz, is that feasible and is that practically possible? It is. Why? Because you can see in that period there, they are overlapping. The dates of births and the dates of death is such that they could have theoretically heard from one another. So that's why now we call that hadith is muttasil. The same goes here. It is theoretically possible that Abdul Aziz could have heard from Anas. This is exactly what we call ittisal. If, theoretically speaking, this bar here was all the way out here, in the sense that there was a gap here now, then that would make the hadith disconnected. What we call munqati'. Meaning that it is not possible, when I claim that I have heard from such a person, well, he died for 10, 15 years ago, how could you have heard from him? If this condition is not fulfilled, this connection of it, then the hadith is rejected. Imam Bukhari, I will have to add very quickly that Imam Bukhari, for other scholars, they just wanted proof that they could have theoretically met with one another. Imam Bukhari went one step further. He wanted proof that they actually sat in the same room with one another. That is how much detail he actually went through to check with that. So this is the first condition of a Sahih hadith, ittisal. One person met the other, who met the other, and then eventually it goes up to the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. Condition 2, the integrity of the reporters. Now we know who has reported the hadith, but that's not sufficient for us in order for us to enable to take benefit from the sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. Why? Because we need to know what kind of people they were. Were they trustworthy people? Were they good Muslims? Did they understand what kind of message that they were passing on from generation to generation? So this constitutes the second condition of a Sahih hadith. Once we have established who heard it, and we have established the names in that chain, then we have to try to establish whether they were good people or not. Were they pious? This forms the second condition of a Sahih hadith. The good faith of the reporters, or what we call in our terminology, the adala of the reporters. And what that basically means is that we are checking to ensure that they are Muslims, that they are baligh, meaning that they are at an age where they can understand and fathom what they are actually saying and passing on to others. That they are courteous people, that they are free from fisq, bad behavior. They are free from bid'ah, for example, as well. Once a person fulfills these conditions, only then will he be fit for his hadith to be accepted as the highest grade of Sahih. If a person, for example, is a Muslim, but at the same time, astaghfirullah, he drinks, then his hadith is rejected. Ibn al-Mubarak, a famous muhaddis, hadith scholar, he said that if a person doesn't attend the Jama'ah prayer, then his integrity has not been established, that his adala has not been established. Think for yourself now, we only gave one hadith so far as an example, and we only had 4 or 5 names there. Imam Bukhari and the likes were checking the character of each and individual narrator for the thousands to be found in their works. So we're trying to find out what exactly each and every one of these reporters was like. A very, very detailed work that they had to actually go through. Each person of the chain would go through those checks. However, there is an exception to that checks. We will inquire, for example, on Ismail bin Ibrahim, on Qatada and the likes. However, when it comes to the companions of our Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, we do not question whether they are good Muslims or not. Why? This is insultive to the companions, ridwanullahi alayhim ajma'in. So the exception to this rule of checks and balances we have in place for the reporters is universal except for the Sahaba Ikram. We do not have to examine their taqwa and integrity because Allah and His Messenger have already informed us of their exalted nature. That otherwise we are seeking a second opinion ourselves after the opinion of Allah and His Messenger. Allah makes it very clear, radiyallahu anhum wa radu an, that Allah is pleased with His companions, with the companions of the Prophet, and they are pleased with Him. Now, we can't go around checking whether Sayyidina Anas used to go to Jama'ah prayer or not. Astaghfirullah. That is gustahi. That is truly insultive to the status of those people who saw the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. So these checks and balances that I am talking about, everyone has to go through it. But the nearest generation to the Prophet, the companions, they are exempt for that for very good reasons, for understandable reasons as well. So far then, we've seen that the chain has to be continuous. These people who are forming the chain and are part of the Sanad, they have to be good Muslims. Now we come to the third condition. It's very well being a pious person. It's very well being a namazi and a person who abstains from alcohol. But you could appreciate that that's totally different to being an accurate person. Remember, you're hearing something and you're passing it on to someone else. That requires intellect. It requires good memory. It requires accuracy now as well. Being a namazi doesn't help in that. So this is where the third condition of a Sahih Hadith report comes in. That we want to establish the piety and the good nature of that person, we also want to know he's accurate as well. That he is not passing on something which is of lesser importance, he is passing on the exact words of our Messenger, alayhi salatu wassalam. So they had to be reliable. What does that basically mean then? Then in reality, what that basically meant is however you heard it, you pass it on to others. It's not a perverted version of Chinese whisper, where the words keep changing. Rather, the exact words you heard, you pass it on. Now, in that middle state, whether you decide to preserve it by your own memory or in written form is entirely up to you. But what is important is that when you pass that information on, you pass it on exactly like you heard it from your shaykh. This is the third condition of a Sahih Hadith. That all the reporters have to be known for their accuracy. One last point before, and I think we will finish in a moment, and inshallah ta'ala we'll continue this tomorrow, is you can appreciate now, hopefully, that this field and this discipline depends largely on the men in the chain who are passing on this message. And you can appreciate now that you have to know about when each reporter was born, when he died, when he traveled, so that we can have an idea of whether they met one another. We also have to find out about the integrity and the adala and the piety of each individual person. And we also have to know about their accuracy. So as a side discipline almost, a field developed within ilm hadith called ilmur rijal, the knowledge of men. Whereas great biographical dictionaries were created by the early scholars so that they could include all of the relevant information on each and individual narrator. So this became a discipline which we called ilm rijal. So because the hadith's strength depends heavily on the men in the chain, a discipline developed called ilmur rijal, the knowledge of men, which helped to gather all of the possible information on a particular narrator at the time. So in a typical book, you would know about his name, his date of birth, his date of death, the teachers and students that he took from, the reputation and accuracy, the travels, for example, and what the scholars said about him. Very quickly, and I will conclude upon this, I'm going to show you a practical example of how much detail the scholars went into to find out what they could about each and every reporter. This is the chain that we are looking of La yu'minu ahadukum hadith. And this is the chain that I said that I will be talking you through. Ismail bin Ibrahim. This is a person that I want to show you how much information that we have about him. From the great works that we have the utmost detail, intricate detail of Ismail bin Ibrahim's life. We know exactly what his name in full. We know when he was born. We know when he passed away. We know his aliases. He was most famously known as Ibn Ulayya. We know what he was like in the eyes of other scholars. We know what his occupation was. This is all information gathered by the early scholars. We have a long list of all the teachers that he had and all of the students that heard from him thereafter. And then, from the scholars' works, we have the opinions of other great scholars about this particular person. As an example, and we'll finish up on this, I've taken 3 pieces of these works, these Ilm Rijal works. And I'll just show you quickly, I don't know if you can see it from there. This is a biography of Ismail bin Ibrahim. And this particular one is taken from the Jarh Ta'dil by Ibn Abi Hatim. Just on Ismail bin Ibrahim's life. It starts here. You've got 1, to 2.5 pages worth of works on him, talking about his life in detail. Then you have another work, you have the Tahzeeb of Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. He's written his own biography on this reporter. The detail of it is quite phenomenal, and it just goes on to tell you everything there is about his life. It shows you how much effort and endeavors that they put in just to know about each and individual reporter. 3 pages there. And then you have Mizanul I'tidal by Imam Zahabi. Again, you have pages of information about what Ismail was like. And it gives you an idea of the depths that these scholars went into to find out exactly what each and individual person was doing. On your way out, you might want to have a look at an example. I brought 1 volume with me of Tahzeeb al-Tahzeeb. This is 1 volume of 8. And basically, it's just the who's who of all of the early reporters. And on your way out, even if you can't read the best of Arabic, you'll be able to appreciate the names that will have in numbers, and then it will tell you all of the detail that goes along with it, what you need to know about this person, whether he's a good reporter, whether he is a bad one. So this is the other conditions. Jazakallah khair.
Irfan ka sagar Peer Karam Shah Zindabad.